They put the first human in the lowest bunk in the lowest hall, and the proctor told me that was a mercy. I remember the way he said it. Oryx stood in the door of the dormitory with the corridor light behind him, and the light came through the membrane of his throat so I could see the muscle work when he spoke. The sail talk from somewhere lower than their mouths. It gives their words a flat, doubled sound, like two voices agreeing to be one. He said, in the trade camp they teach the off-world intake, that I had been assigned to Hall 9 because Hall 9 was the safest place in the spire, and I should be grateful, and I should stay there. I said I was grateful. I'd learned a long time before that there is a kind of authority you don't argue with on the first day. You let it spend itself. You watch where it puts its weight. He didn't leave. He came in past the bunks, and the other cadets in Hall 9 went still in a way I would come to know very well over the next cycles. Not the stillness of fear, exactly, but the stillness of a field of grass when something passes overhead. Every one of them dropped their eyes and lowered their height. They had ways of getting smaller that I didn't have. The sail can fold the long bones of their backs and bring their heads down level with their shoulders, and when a whole hall of them does it at once the room seems to exhale and sink. I stood where I was. I am not tall, by my own people's measure. In Hall 9 that night I was the tallest thing standing, and I felt it land on me like weather. Oryx stopped in front of my bunk. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes are set wide, the way a prey animal's are, and a sail looking straight at you has to turn its whole head to do it, because looking straight ahead is not their natural attitude. It costs them something. He turned his head and looked at me straight, and I understood that he was making himself do a thing his body did not want to do, and that he was doing it on purpose, so that I would understand he was serious. "You will want to be seen," he said. "You're kind, I have read the intake notes. You will want to do the work and be measured for it. You will look at the ledger and you will want your mark to climb." He let that sit. "Here is the only thing I will tell you that matters. On this world the thing that climbs is the thing that is taken. Stay low, stay in the bottom tier. The bottom tier survives the cull more often than the top because the top is watched and what is watched is culled. Do you understand me?" I said I understood the words. "That is not the same thing," he said, and he folded himself down and left. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the people who tell these stories afterward always make the human feel something noble on the first night, and I didn't. I felt tired. I had come a long way to be in that room. The spire had taken one human, exactly one, as a test of something nobody had explained to me, and the journey out had been 6 months of cramped transit and a language I learned out of a box, and I had arrived to be told that the way to survive the most selective war college in the reach of charted space was to be bad at it on purpose. I lay in the lowest bunk and listened to the hall breathe, and I thought, in the plain way you think when you're too tired to dress it up, I did not come here to be small. That was the whole of it, no speech, just that. I should tell you about the ledger because everything that happened turns on it, and if you don't understand the ledger you'll think the rest was about pride. It wasn't about pride. It was about a machine. The spire ranked everyone, not the way an Earth school ranks with marks read out at the end of a term. The ledger was live. It hung in the central well of the spire, a column of light that ran up through the open core of the building so that from any tier you could lean over the rail and see it, and it showed every cadet standing at that exact moment, climbing or falling as the trials registered. When you slept, you held your place. When you woke and trained and the instruments read what you'd done, the column moved. A cadet who solved a fast problem in the morning could watch their own name rise through the light before midday, and every other cadet in the spire could watch it too, and that was the point. The ledger was not a record. It was a spectacle. It was built to be looked at. And the cull came for the bottom of it. Periodically, they did not tell us when, which was part of the design, the lowest band of the ledger was scrubbed. The cadets in it were gone by the next watch. Not killed. I want to be clear about that because the easy version of this story makes the spire a slaughterhouse, and it wasn't. They were sent home, returned, marked unfit and put back on the transit they'd come in on. For most of them that was a kind of death anyway because of where they came from and what going back meant, but no one died in the halls. The cull was bureaucratic. It was a list. That made it worse somehow. A list doesn't hate you. So the system was simple to read and brutal to live in. Climb and be watched, and risk being the tall thing that gets taken when the watchers decide they don't like what they see. Stay low, and risk the cull scrubbing the floor out from under you. Every cadet in the spire was solving that problem every hour of every day, and most of them solved it by hovering, staying just above the cull line, and just below the height where being noticed turned dangerous. They had a word for it that the box translated as the settle. You found your settle and you held it. A good sail cadet could hold their settle for years. It was considered a high skill. It was, I came to think, the only skill the place actually taught, dressed up in 1,000 trials about weapons and doctrine and survival. The spire said it was making soldiers. What it was making was a population that had perfected the art of not being the one. I did not have a settle. I didn't have the instinct that built one. I have tried since to explain to people who didn't grow up human what it is we don't have, and the closest I can get is this. A human child does a hard thing and looks up to see if anyone saw. That look-up is in us before language. It is the oldest part of us. We are the animal that does the thing and then wants the doing of it to be seen. And on earth that is so ordinary you never notice it's there. The way you never notice air. You only notice it when you're standing in a hall full of creatures who were shaped by a world that taught them the exact opposite. That the one who looks up to be seen is the one the sky takes. And you feel, in your own body, that you cannot make yourself stop looking up. For the first stretch of cycles, I did what Auric told me. I held low. I want that on the record too, because later people decided I had walked in defiant from the first hour and I didn't. I tried his way. I was not too proud to try the way that kept people alive. It was harder than I expected, and it taught me more than the trials did. The early trials were graded problems, a doctrine puzzle, a marksman's lane, a timed fabrication where you were handed raw stock and a fault to fix and a clock. I had done versions of all of them in my old life, in harder weather, with worse stock and a real clock that ended in someone dying if you were slow. On Earth I had cut line ahead of a fire and rigged anchors on a face in wind that would take a body off the rock if the body got careless, and I had learned the particular calm that comes when the work is real, and the cost of failing it is not a mark on a column of light but a person. So the spire's trials, for me, were not frightening. They were familiar. I would look at a problem and my hands would already know the answer, and the discipline, Auric's discipline, the settle, was to make my hands do less than they knew. I'd solve a fabrication trial at 60% of my speed and stop, and stand there with the answer half finished, and let the clock eat the rest. I'd shoot the marksman's lane and miss two on purpose, low and outside, the way a competent cadet misses when they're tired. I'd read a doctrine puzzle and give the third best answer. And I'd watch my mark on the ledger hold steady in the low band, a little above the cull line, and tell myself that was correct, that was survival, that was the wise thing, and feel something in me curdle a little more each time. Here is what the holding low taught me. It taught me that the cadets around me were not stupid and were not weak. They were doing exactly what I was doing, running at a fraction of themselves on purpose, and they had been doing it so long they had forgotten it was a choice. I would watch a sail cadet named Esh fold a fabrication problem in half with 3 clean moves, and then deliberately fumble the 4th. And I knew, because I was doing the same thing one bench over, exactly what that fumble was. It was a lie told to a machine. The whole hall was a room full of brilliant creatures lying to a machine about how brilliant they were, hour after hour, year after year, because the machine had been built by their own people to reward the lie. I had thought, on the first night, that I'd come to a place that selected for excellence. I had come to a place that selected for the willingness to hide it. And the cost of that was not abstract. I watched it land on Esh. Esh had the settle better than anyone in Hall 9. He'd been at the spire longer than most of us, long enough that the younger cadets watched how he held his place and tried to copy it. He was generous in the quiet way the place allowed. He'd show you, without ever seeming to show you, where the cull line was sitting that week, so you knew how low you could safely run. He kept 3 or 4 of us off the floor more than once just by a tilt of his head at the right moment. He never rose. He never fell. He had turned not being the one into something close to an art, and he had survived years of culls doing it, and I think he believed he would survive forever that way, because the math of it was sound. Stay above the floor, below the height that draws the eye, and the list never reaches you. The list reached him anyway. What happened was this. A trial came that no one could half solve. It was a live problem, a containment failure in one of the lower fabrication bays. A real one, not a staged one. The kind of thing that happens in a building full of cadets and volatile stock. And the spire, which never wasted a chance to measure us, threw the bay open and let the ledger watch how we responded. Most cadets did the safe thing, which was nothing. They held their settle. They did not run toward a failing bay, because running toward it meant being seen running toward it, and being seen was the danger. Esh did the safe thing too. He held. And the bay's fault spread because no one moved, and it caught 2 younger cadets who'd been slow to clear. And they were hurt, not killed, but hurt, badly enough to be carried out. And when the spire reviewed it afterward, the instruments asked a question the settle had no answer for. The instruments asked, who was nearest and competent and did nothing? Esh was nearest. Esh was competent. Esh did nothing, because nothing was what the place had spent years teaching him to do. And the ledger, which I had thought only rewarded the lie, turned out to have a second face that I hadn't seen. A face that came out exactly once in a long while to remind everyone the machine was watching for that too, and it marked him. Not for failing a trial. For holding his settle when holding it cost 2 cadets their wholeness. They called him the next watch. The art that had kept him alive for years killed him in an afternoon, because the one thing the settle cannot do is move toward danger, and sometimes the work is moving toward danger, and the machine knew it. I stood at the rail of Hall 9 and watched Esh's mark go out of the column of light. He came past me with his kit on the way to the transit, folded down small the way they get when they're leaving, and he stopped. And he looked at me straight, which cost him the way it cost Auric, and I understood he was making himself do it on purpose so I'd hear him. He said, "You don't have the settle," not unkind, almost relieved. "I used to think that was your weakness." He turned his head away again, back to the natural attitude, eyes wide and forward and seeing nothing straight. "Don't learn it," he said, and he went down to the transit, and I never saw him again. I thought about that for a long time. I'd spent cycles trying to learn the thing he just told me, with the last useful breath he spent in the place, not to learn. I'd been so careful. I'd run myself at 60% and missed shots on purpose and given third-best answers, and I'd told myself it was survival, and the man who was best in the building at exactly that survival had just walked past me to the transit, because the survival had a hole in it shaped like the moment the work gets real. The settle keeps you alive right up until the day staying alive requires you to be seen doing something. And then it has nothing to give you, and it takes everything back at once. That was the night I stopped. I didn't decide it as a grand thing. I want to keep saying that because the version people tell makes it a grand thing, and grand things are easy to dismiss. I decided it the way you decide to set a broken bone, because leaving it the way it was had become the worst pain. I lay in the lowest bunk in Hall 9, and I did the plain arithmetic. If I stayed low, I might survive the next cull, and the one after, and somewhere down the line, a real problem would open in front of me, and I would have to choose between moving toward it and holding my settle. And if I'd spent all my cycles practicing the settle, my body would choose for me, and it would choose wrong, the way Esches chose wrong. The settle was a habit, and habits run you when the moment is too fast for thought. I did not want my hands to have practiced the wrong thing for the one moment that mattered. So I would practice the right thing instead. I would do the work, all of it at full in the open, and let the machine measure exactly what I was, and let the column of light say it where everyone could see, and take whatever came of being the tall thing in the grass. Not for pride, because a human who practices hiding their hands will have hiding hands when the fire comes, and I had decided, on a tide-locked world a long way from home, that when the fire came I wanted my hands to know what they knew. The next trial was a fabrication lane, raw stock, a seated fault, a clock. I'd run it at 60% a dozen times by then. I knew the answer before the clock started. This time I let my hands do what they knew. It took less than half the clock. I built the fix clean and true and faster than I had ever let myself build anything in that building, and I did not stop at the fault they'd seeded. I saw a second weakness in the stock, an honest one, the kind you learn to see when you've trusted your life to a bad anchor and lived, and I fixed that too, because on Earth you fix the thing that will kill the next person, not just the thing on the worksheet. And then I stood up, with the clock still running and most of it left, and I looked up. I looked up the way the oldest part of me has always looked up, to see if anyone saw. Everyone saw. The hall had gone still in the grass stillness, every cadet folded down and eyes wide, because a thing had risen in the room and risen on purpose, and they could feel it the way they felt weather. And out in the central well, the column of light moved. My mark came up off the floor of the ledger where it had sat for cycles, and it climbed, and it kept climbing, through the low band and the settle band and up into the height where almost no one ran, the watched height, the dangerous height, and it stopped near the top with the whole spire able to see it. I had never in my life felt so much like myself and so much in danger at the same time. Both things were true. That is the part the grand version leaves out, that doing the human thing did not feel like courage. It felt like relief and exposure at once, like taking off a coat you'd been wearing too long in a room that turned out to be cold. That was when Vortek hit me. I haven't told you about Vortek yet, and I should, because he was the part of the spire that wasn't a machine. Not every cadet at the spire was Sale. The place took intake from across the reach, and some of what it took was predator stock species that had come up on their own worlds as the thing that takes, not the thing that gets taken. They were rarer, and they did not have the settle because their ancestors never needed it. Their instinct was the opposite, to mark territory and dominate the visible. The spire used them deliberately. A predator cadet in a hall of prey stock kept the prey stock honest about why the settle existed. Vortek was the predator cadet in our part of the spire. He was big through the shoulders, plated along the forearms, and he had spent his cycles enjoying a simple arrangement. He was the one thing in the building the Sale instinct told everyone to fear and defer to, and they did, and he liked it. He had ignored me when I held low. A human at the bottom of the ledger was beneath his notice, which suited me. The moment my mark climbed into the watched height, I became a different thing to him, a visible rival, the tall thing in the grass, and his instinct read that the way a predator's instinct reads it, as a challenge that had to be answered or it would spread. He came across the hall while my mark was still settling near the top of the column, and he hit me, open-handed and hard across the side of the head, the way you'd cuff a thing to put it back in its place, in front of everyone, so that everyone would see the tall thing knocked down and the order restored. It was a good hit. It rang my skull and put me down on one knee, and the hall watched it happen with the held breath of creatures who had been waiting, some of them, to see exactly this. The human reminded where the human belonged. I knelt there for a second and let the ring fade. And here is the thing I have to get right, because it is the whole of what I am and the whole of why the story is worth telling. I was not angry. People want me to have been angry. Anger is the easy fuel and it makes a clean tale. But I had done real work in real danger long enough to know that anger is a thing you cannot afford when the cost of a mistake is a body, and I had trained that out of myself years before I ever saw the spire. What I felt, kneeling on the floor of Hall 9 with the side of my head ringing, and a predator standing over me waiting for me to either cower or rage, was something flatter and older and much harder to stand against than anger. I felt certain. I got up. I didn't get up fast or slow. I got up the way you get up when getting up is just the next thing the work requires. And I didn't hit him back, which I think surprised him more than a blow would have, because his instinct had a whole script for a blow and no script at all for what I did instead, which was to stand up to my full height in front of him, look at him straight, which costs a human nothing. We look straight by default. It is our natural attitude, and I have wondered since whether that small fact unnerved them more than anything, that the human could do effortlessly the thing that cost them so much, and say, in the flat trade cant, loud enough for the hall, "You can do that again, it won't change the column." Continue to next message, see note below.